Hey, what's up guys? Node Investor here, bringing you guys an update on the cryptocurrency markets. We'll look at Bitcoin, a few of the other names. Bitcoin Cash begins trading on Coinbase, and some notable news items that we have seen here as of late in the last couple of days. But looking at Bitcoin prices here very quickly first, looking at the chart here, you can see this is the daily chart of BTC on Coinbase, and just the dramatic fall that it has been over the last 8 days. Yesterday's volume was massive compared to last Wednesday's volume on that initial break. Just huge volume coming off the lows. We started to see a lot of volatility near the lows. Leads me to believe that we may have seen a near-term bottom, but prices are starting to build a little bit of a symmetrical pattern. Technically, it's a bear flag, a bear pennant that is a pause that could break lower after a little bit of relief. So that's what I'm watching here today, this bear pennant. This is also the 1 hour chart here, and notice that there's this trend line, this overhead resistance trend line that has been forming on this 1 hour chart. So you saw this rally here, rally here, rally here before this pullback, and so prices are really starting to coil up, really starting to tighten out right here. It's interesting to note that this overhead trend line also corresponds with the 10 EMA on the 4 hour chart. We'll look at that here in a sec, but that's a bounce right into resistance essentially, and now we're seeing prices pull back. So near term, what I'm watching on this 1 hour chart is a break above this line. If we can get above this near term resistance, about 4560, 4600, that will signal some more upside action, some more bounce on the daily chart. Now keep in mind, it's very oversold, it's very stretched to the downside, and so it would not be unusual to see some more upside bounce action. But because the trend is so strong to the downside, especially on the 4 hour chart, this could just be another pause that sets up another leg lower. If we begin to break below this trend line and this near-term support that we saw, first support being just the low we saw a couple of hours ago around 43.50, and then below that, this higher low pattern would be broken if it breaks below that $4,300 mark. If you see that break below that, most likely we'll see a retest of yesterday's lows, which were right above $4,000 on Coinbase. I mean, we were an inch away from edging into that $3,900 range. So that's what I'm looking for here. If it breaks below, look for a retest or a higher low that would line up with this low. But right now, there is no bullish momentum. The bounces continue to be sold into. Looking at this 4 hour chart, let me clear the lines real quick here. Looking at this 4 hour chart, you can see we had a big rally yesterday. The biggest 4 hour candle we've seen, gave hope that maybe the low was in. A lot of movement, bullish engulfing candle, but look at where it failed. It was literally just a bounce into some oversold conditions, ran right into this moving average. We saw the big sell-off, and then this really triggered some big selling, but that created a huge wick here on massive volume, and so this has put a line in the sand now in terms of price points. The fact that it rallied so strongly off of that low, and this is a big move on a percentage basis. In a few hours we saw double-digit rally on BTC here. Many of the other alts were hit very hard off that low and bounced up very strongly before pulling back again, but you saw these 25% moves in some of these names in a very short period of time, one way and up. So we'll look at a few other alts real quick, but that's really the thing to note is the 4 hour chart is still drifting lower. So clearing this near-term overhead resistance, this is that same line on that 1 hour chart, that overhead trend line, which lines up with this 10 EMA on the 4 hour chart. We're seeing prices starting to pull back again. So again, that bearish pennant may play out, but this is the first target I'm looking at. In the big picture, looking at the next big target on the price point here, let me zoom out. You see this weekly support here on a closing basis. We had 3 weeks that closed above this line. That's really the next major support zone. That's around that $3,500 mark, give or take. And then below that, it's going to be around that $3,100, $3,200 mark. So that's really the next zone of resistance or support if you want to look for another downside target if this is going to continue lower. Doesn't look like a lot on this chart, but 3,500 is a big percentage away still from current prices. If we would move down from this $4,400 zone to 3,500, you're talking another 20% lower in prices, and then below that would be 30% lower to the next line. So that's substantial and would still be a big move in the altcoins if Bitcoin dropped another 20 to 30%. And so you got to stay defensive. I expect we'll see some bounce action here just because prices have moved so far so fast. but the selling has no doubt been relentless. The momentum has been strong to the downside. We've seen some very volatile action here over the last day off this low, so you're seeing the bulls and the bears really start to battle it out here. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, if we can break out of that little tight pattern that I highlighted on that 1 hour chart. Looking at the coin market cap here, so just a big drop, very dramatic, just carnage across the board as we've seen, and we hit a low of 140 yesterday, and that's been a very fast move down, considering just last week prices were still in the low 200s on the coin market cap, so $212 billion there down to $140 billion, so substantial drop in valuations. We're also seeing some news. We saw BACT being delayed. So BACT was not a huge delay, but there was a lot of hope that, hey, this would kick off some bullish sentiment, some rallying, and that was squashed because they delayed their launch from December to January. Not a huge delay. Right now they're targeting end of January. Not unusual to see, such big projects run into some delays as they progress and get ready to launch. So we'll have to see how this plays out end of January, early February. We continue to see the SEC fallout, the ICO fallout. Recently we've seen, Air Token and Paragon had to refund investors, and that would, now granted these were crap coins, right? But it would still put fear in many of the other ICOs in terms of, their accepted ETH for their ICO. The prices of ETH have plummeted, and if they have to refund investors that that money, that would be a huge loss to many of these projects having to go that way. So the late 2017, the late 2018 ICOs are still getting hammered here. Prices have really fallen off, but there was also some recent news around Salt and Shapeshift's CEO Eric Voorhees, because he was listed as a director. So now they're investigating Salt. They subpoenaed them, and so it just continues. The story continues. ICOs in the U.S. market for Americans, for the most part, are over with and done, just because of the regulation. You've got to be a accredited investor, or you've got to be a VC, and just the registration process. So many ICOs have already long since moved out of this market and said, we're banning U.S. investors altogether, and this is why, right? They were already expecting that we were going to see more SEC crackdown and more influence on this for their failure to register as a security. And so the fallout continues. Speaking of ICOs, another one here that we saw today was Gigawatts. They raised $22 million through an ICO, and they were a mining firm, and they have filed for bankruptcy now, and for a number of reasons, but they were just unable to pay their debts when due. And this article says that they had an estimated $50,000 worth of assets and liabilities that ranged $10 to $50 million. And so just a big story. It's a big failure on one of the big mining firms that we're trying to start up here. And it just kind of makes you wonder, what other fallout will be coming to light here with this bear market as prices continue to deepen here. You see, I remember earlier this year we saw this $700 million Bitcoin mining farm coming to New York, and this was in June of this year. And so I'd have to wonder, how is this going to come along? $700 million. You would imagine that these companies have a business model that was assuming prices that were much higher than $4,000 BTC. And so they have a limited runway when prices begin to drop, because the cash flows are just not there. So it makes me wonder what kind of updates we'll begin to see on other similar projects that were just kicking off earlier in the year when crypto prices were just so much higher. And now we're seeing this fallout and some of this continuation. And so Coinbase started trading Bitcoin Cash again yesterday. They declared the BCH ABC chain as the winner by designating them as BCH, and they will retain that ticker symbol. So we see that battle is still happening, but Coinbase is saying Bitcoin Cash ABC will be that chain that has that designation. Looking at Binance for those two coins, you can see this is BCH ABC here on the left. This is the 1 hour chart. They started launching the trading last week, and you can see it's been a slow drift lower as prices overall have continued lower anyway, but for the last day or so, it's kind of been sitting tight here in this range, while SV has continued to just drift lower. SV is now trading at 56 USD tether on Binance, and so it's had quite the fall here over the last several days. Not a lot of that volume or value has really pushed back into this range here, so the combined total of the two coins at this point is still under $300, and you're seeing Bitcoin Cash on Coinbase trade around $240, $250 right now. It's been flat since it started. You can see this was the gap when they paused trading and it resumed yesterday, and it's just kind of been in this flat, tight range since then. So the debacle continues, the confusion continues between the exchanges and the Bitcoin Cash hard fork. But looking at the charts here, let's deep dive a few other names very quickly. So we looked at Bitcoin and some of the price levels to be watching here. Prices really just continue to narrow, and many of the other charts are forming very similar price action. Looking at Cardano here, and just this drift lower, bouncing into the 10 EMA on that 4-hour chart. You're looking at some of the other big names here. Ripple was one of the holdouts last week, but has also fallen hard, and you saw this big wick here before that bounce, but again, just drifting lower, continue to hit resistance there at those moving averages. Looking at Neo single digits, $9 Neo was at 8.20 yesterday, and just has had a dramatic fall here. Again, massive volume at the lows, but still unable to clear any type of near-term resistance, so something to keep an eye on here near term. Most of these charts, the same pattern is the same story, right? Just hitting this resistance, bouncing in, moving lower, but the volume spike here on many of these names was dramatic, and it was felt very much like a washout. It's too early to say that was capitulation. Generally, capitulation, you see a quick reversal higher. Near term, we saw a quick reversal. Haven't seen any follow through on that daily chart, but from the low, I mean, look at this big reversal we saw here. This is a 4-hour chart again, but you had that massive move lower and a couple of candles, was down 20% in no time, and then quickly bounced up and erased all those losses, and that was a big move. I mean, that was a 25% move in a very short period of time. But then the volatility continued back down another 17%, and prices are just starting to tighten up here, still drifting lower all around. Big picture though, if you look at that daily chart, just very stretched to the downside. You know, the 10 EMA is still way up here at almost $12 on Neo, and you know that would require a 30+% bounce just to close that gap. So it's usually a combination of both. You get a little bit of a bounce and you get time. Prices have to sit tight, let the moving averages catch up, then you go from there. So near term, this is really what I'm watching, kind of this pattern resolving here. Like so many names, they're setting this up where you're getting prices really starting to narrow, and it's going to be interesting to see if we get any more of a bounce. Getting above this overhead trend line on all of these names would likely signal some continuation, some bounce, and really all I'm looking for on those bounces is a bounce right into that next resistance level. Now that on a percentage basis, that's a good bounce. You know, you look at 30+% on something like that, or a bounce into the next EMA, but it's still double digits in any way you look at it. Same with BTC. If it bounces that high, you'd see a double-digit gain on a bounce there. Just quickly cycling through a few others. Ontology, very similar action. Litecoin, similar type of pattern here. Just drifting lower again after this little bit of a bounce. And so the story is the same. You're seeing Ethereum kind of starting to form a little bit of a descending triangle here. Here's the 1-hour chart. Rolling over a little bit, so has been much weaker than BTC on this recent move, and ETH hit that lower target that I was watching on this first break, and man, what a move that had. Just a dramatic fall on Ethereum, continuing to fall lower. Looking at the BTC pairs, there's a few holdouts that are holding up relatively well to Bitcoin, right? So you have names like NEM. NEM had that strong move last week, has just kind of been consolidating. The moving averages are still moving up, still holding above the breakout point here on the Bitcoin pair. So obviously BTC's falling. The USD pair of this is going to be dropping, but versus Bitcoin, this is starting to move higher. Factum is relentless, just continues to power higher, has not wanting to pause during this entire market. A little bit extended here now, certainly long in the tooth on this rally. You've seen some signs of slowing down, a little bit of a divergence starting to show up here on the MACD and the RSI, but still trending higher very strongly. QKC, again, another one bouncing and just had a good consolidation here. Very choppy, very volatile, but has been breaking out here today and moving higher out of this range. I'm watching EOS here holding tight versus BTC, just kind of sitting flat, but looking for some potential upside action here. Has been seeing a lot of support at the lows. And here recently, Dash moving off these lows with some pretty good bounce versus Bitcoin here. So you can see from the bottom here, we're already up about 10%. So Dash is interesting to see that bouncing a little bit. On the daily chart again, this is bouncing right into those EMAs, right into resistance. So certainly not as strong as some of the other names that we were looking at here. Ripple still looking good all around. It was pausing yesterday. It needed to after that strong rally it had versus Bitcoin. It did break out and just kind of sitting tight here near the highs. So keep an eye on this one. This was a huge volume candle here that was red. Very wide range, a lot of indecision. So that certainly marked some near-term toppy action here on the 1 hour chart. You can see that big selling followed by volume. So just kind of sitting tight here, but the daily chart is still consolidating. So as long as it holds above this breakout point, near term, I'd be looking at that EMA around 8,900, 9,000 on the BTC pair. But this one's another one that's holding up relatively well. Most other names are not faring anywhere near as good. They're dropping faster than Bitcoin on this selling pressure. And so these are the few holdouts for now to make note of. Looking at the coin market cap here, the last 24 hours, some red, some green across the board, a little bit of back and forth, but you can see, mostly down, a few green, few ups. You can see Dash having a positive day here today, but just most of this is just really bounces off the lows. Nothing very strong really other than the few I pointed out. So relatively flat day for the most part. So just wanted to point this out, guys. It is a holiday here tomorrow in the US, so happy Thanksgiving for those that are celebrating. I will be slowing down here for a few days, taking some time off, hanging out with friends and family, enjoying the holiday, but I will be back over the weekend and we'll be posting some updates. Hopefully the markets can be a little calm for a little while, but that's unlikely considering the recent action. So I wish you guys all the best. Have a wonderful rest of your day, rest of your weekend. Until next time, take care, everyone. Talk to you soon.